I won the lottery, but kept it secret from my family. Here's why that was the best decision I ever made. You know that feeling when you're 30 years old and your family still treats you like the family disappointment? Yeah, that was me last Saturday. Leo Fletcher, history teacher, certified black sheep, and apparently the guy who peaked in college according to everyone at my brother's backyard barbecue. The whole thing started as a double celebration. My older brother Jake got promoted to some hotshot position at his private equity firm, and it happened to fall on my 30th birthday. What are the odds, right? So naturally, my parents decided to throw one big party, because why waste money on two separate events when you can just make one of them feel like an afterthought? I should have known something was off when I walked into my parents' backyard and saw the banner. It was one of those fancy custom jobs from the party store downtown. Big bold letters spelling out "Congratulations, Jake," with smaller text underneath that said, "And happy birthday, Leo." The "and" part looked like it was added as an afterthought, squeezed in with a different font. Classic. My dad, Mark, was already holding court near the grill, telling anyone who would listen about Jake's meteoric rise in the finance world. He had this way of gesturing with his beer bottle that made everything sound like a military campaign. He was personally commanding from the sidelines. The guest list was the usual suspects. Extended family, some neighbors, a few of Jake's work buddies who looked like they stepped out of a Wall Street recruitment poster. Everyone seemed to know exactly why they were there, and it wasn't to celebrate my 3 decades on this planet. My mom, Carol, was buzzing around in full hostess mode, making sure everyone had drinks and knew the story. The story being how proud they were of their successful son, Jake, and his 6-figure salary, and his corner office, and his company BMW. She had it down to a science, that little elevator pitch about her golden boy. I grabbed a beer from the cooler and tried to blend into the background. That's always been my strategy at these family gatherings. Be present but invisible. Smile and nod when spoken to. Don't mention anything about actually enjoying teaching or finding fulfillment in shaping young minds, because apparently that makes people uncomfortable. Uncle Jerry spotted me first. He's one of those guys who thinks volume equals wisdom and has never met a conversation he couldn't dominate. He came over with that look on his face, the one that says he's about to drop some real truth on you, whether you want it or not. He clapped me on the shoulder hard enough to make me stumble a step. His cologne was the kind that probably violated several environmental protection laws. He started in on me about how teaching was fine for young people, but at my age I should be thinking about real career opportunities. His son was opening up a car wash chain, and they needed managers. Real money, he said, not this hobby stuff. I nodded along, because what else do you do? You can't exactly explain to someone like Uncle Jerry that teaching American history to 16-year-olds is actually incredibly rewarding when done right. That watching a kid finally understand the complexity of the civil rights movement or make connections between past and present events gives you a high that no corporate bonus could match. The afternoon dragged on through a haze of small talk about weather and gas prices. I checked my phone relentlessly, not because I was busy, but because it was better than looking up at a wall of faces that screamed disappointment. Around 5 o'clock, my dad called everyone over to the patio table. This was it, the moment we'd all been building toward. Time for the speeches and the gift presentations. The grand finale where everyone would remember why we were really here. My father has always had a flair for the dramatic. Must be where Jake gets it from. He stood up with his beer raised high, waiting for the chatter to die down. When he had everyone's attention, he launched into what I can only describe as a corporate keynote speech about his eldest son's achievements. 5 solid minutes about Jake's predatory instincts in business. How he could smell a deal from across the room. How his 6-figure salary was just the beginning of his empire-building phase. The way he talked, you'd think Jake was single-handedly responsible for keeping the American economy afloat. Everyone was nodding along, making appreciative noises at all the right moments. Jake was eating it up, of course. He had that satisfied smile of someone who's hearing exactly what they want to hear about themselves. His fiancée was practically glowing with pride, already calculating what this promotion meant for their future lifestyle. Then my dad's eyes found me across the table. I could see the exact moment when he remembered this was supposed to be my celebration too. His expression shifted slightly, like he was trying to figure out how to fit a square peg into a round hole. The addition to his toast felt like watching someone try to paint over a crack in the wall. Awkward and obvious and not fooling anyone. He mentioned that I was turning 30, which everyone already knew. He said I taught kids about the past, which made it sound like I was some kind of museum curator nobody visits. Then came the killer line about having summers free to think about life. The nervous laughter from the crowd was almost worse than silence would have been. It was a sound of people who knew they were witnessing something uncomfortable but didn't know how to respond. I forced a smile and raised my beer in acknowledgement, because that's what you do when you're the family disappointment. You play along. After the toast came the gift presentation. My parents had clearly put a lot of thought into Jake's present. They walked him over to the driveway with the ceremony of a red carpet reveal. There sat a brand new BMW 5 Series, gleaming in the late afternoon sun like something out of a car commercial. The bow on the hood was bigger than my monthly grocery budget. But that wasn't even the real gift. The real gift was in the glove compartment. A folder containing paperwork for a $100,000 down payment on a house in one of those gated communities where the homeowners association probably has rules about what color socks you can wear while getting your mail. My dad kept repeating this line about how a man needs his own castle, like he was dispensing ancient wisdom instead of just showing off how much money he was willing to spend on his favorite child. Jake and his fiancée were practically bouncing with excitement. She was already talking about interior decorating, and pool installations like the house was already built. Everyone gathered around to congratulate them and examine the paperwork and take pictures for social media. I stood there watching this whole production unfold, feeling like I was observing it from outside my own body. This was my birthday party. These were my parents. This was my family. And I might as well have been furniture for all the attention anyone was paying to me. Then my mom approached with something in her hand, a cheap envelope, the kind you get free from the bank. No fanfare, no ceremony, no gathering of the crowd for photos. She handed it to me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Inside was a single Powerball lottery ticket, not even a scratch-off, just a regular lottery ticket with numbers I didn't recognize. The kind of thing you buy at a gas station when you're feeling spontaneous or desperate. It probably cost her $3. My father's laugh cut through the general party noise like a rusty blade. He was looking at me with this expression of paternal amusement, like he'd just delivered the punchline to the world's longest joke. His words hit me like a physical blow to the chest. My only chance to catch up with my brother. Hold on to it tight. And there it was. The punchline I'd been waiting for my entire life. The crowd went quiet again, but this time it was different. This wasn't nervous laughter territory anymore. This was that special kind of silence that happens when everyone realizes they've just witnessed something truly awful. I looked down at the lottery ticket in my hand. $3 worth of false hope wrapped up as a birthday present. The mathematical probability of this thing being worth anything more than the paper it was printed on was roughly the same as me spontaneously developing the ability to fly. But I smiled anyway. I thanked my parents for their thoughtful gift. I made a joke about how I'd let them know when I won the jackpot. I played my role as the good-natured loser who takes his lumps with grace and humor, because that's what you do when you're 30 years old and your family still sees you as a consolation prize. The party wound down after that. People started making their excuses and heading home. Jake and his fiancée drove off in their new BMW to go look at house listings. My parents began the cleanup process, still buzzing with excitement about their successful son's bright future. I helped pack up the leftover food, mostly so I'd have something to eat for the next few days. Teaching doesn't exactly come with a massive food budget, and pizza for my brother's celebration was better than the ramen noodles I had waiting at home. My mom sent me off with a container of potato salad and a pat on the head like I was 12 years old. The drive back to my apartment gave me time to process what had just happened. 30 years of being the afterthought, and somehow I kept expecting things to change. Einstein had a quote about insanity being doing the same thing over and over while expecting different results. I was starting to think he might have had a point. My apartment welcomed me with all the enthusiasm of a funeral parlor. One bedroom, barely affordable rent. Furniture that came from 3 different garage sales and somehow still managed not to match. The leftover pizza went on the kitchen counter next to a stack of papers I needed to grade before Monday. I sat down at my computer desk and stared at the lottery ticket. $3 worth of disappointment waiting to happen. My parents' idea of hope for my future. Their way of telling me that random chance was my best shot at ever amounting to anything in their eyes. I almost threw it away right then. Almost crumpled it up and tossed it in the trash with the empty pizza box and the wrapping paper from Jake's car bow. Almost, but something stopped me. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was masochism. Maybe it was just a need confirmed once and for all that even my parents' low expectations were still too high. I opened my laptop and navigated to the lottery website. The winning numbers were already posted. Drawing had happened earlier that evening while we were all pretending to have a good time at my expense. I held the ticket up to the screen and started comparing numbers. First number matched. Probably a coincidence. Second number matched too. Okay, that was weird but still not that unusual. Third number. Fourth number. Fifth number. My hand started shaking slightly as I checked and double-checked each digit. Then the Powerball number. The red one that determines whether you win grocery money or generational wealth. It matched. I stared at the screen for a long time, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Then I looked at the ticket again. Then back at the screen. The numbers weren't changing. This wasn't a dream or a mistake or some kind of cosmic joke, though it felt like all 3 at once. $134 million. That's what the website said the jackpot was worth. More money than my entire family had ever seen combined. More money than I could spend in several lifetimes. More money than anyone needed. Certainly more than anyone deserved for buying a $3 ticket their mother gave them as a pity present. The laughter started as a chuckle deep in my chest. Then it grew into something bigger, something I couldn't control. I was sitting alone in my crappy apartment, holding a lottery ticket worth more than most people's houses, laughing like I'd finally lost my mind completely. Maybe I had. Maybe this was what a complete psychological break felt like. Maybe tomorrow I'd wake up and realize I'd imagined the whole thing. But for right now, in this moment, I was officially the luckiest unlucky person in America. The irony was so perfect it almost hurt. My father's cruel joke about this being my only chance to catch up with my brother. My mother's $3 pity present. The family disappointment striking it rich, while everyone else was celebrating someone else's success. But as the laughter died down and the reality of the situation began to sink in, I felt something else creeping into my consciousness. Something cold and calculating and completely unlike anything I'd ever felt before. Not joy, not excitement, not even relief. Determination. They would never know. That was my first clear thought after the initial shock wore off. My family, with their condescending smiles and their disappointed sighs and their casual cruelty disguised as concern. They would never know that their throwaway gift had just changed everything. I looked around my apartment with new eyes. This wouldn't be home much longer. Nothing in my life would stay the same. But they didn't need to know that. Not yet. Not until I was ready to show them exactly what their only chance had really been worth. The lottery ticket sat on my desk like a loaded weapon. And for the first time in my life, I was the one holding all the cards. The first thing you learn about being secretly rich is that nobody teaches you how to do it. There's no handbook for how to win the lottery while your family thinks you're a loser. Amazon doesn't have a 5-star rated guide on maintaining the perfect balance between appearing broke and actually having more money than God. I spent the first week after my win sitting in my apartment, staring at the ticket like it might evaporate if I looked away too long. The rational part of my brain kept insisting this was all some elaborate hallucination brought on by years of suppressed family resentment and too much instant ramen. But Google doesn't lie. The lottery website doesn't lie. And the lawyer I called definitely didn't lie when he told me I was about to become one of the wealthiest people in the state. His name was Marcus Webb, and his voice had that particular tone that rich people's lawyers develop. Like he was discussing the weather instead of life-changing amounts of money. The meeting with Webb happened in downtown Chicago, in one of those glass tower offices where the elevator requires a key card just to reach certain floors. I took 3 buses to get there because my beat-up Honda Civic was making that grinding noise again, and I figured a multimillionaire probably shouldn't show up in a car held together by duct tape and prayers. Webb's office looked like something out of a legal drama. Floor-to-ceiling windows, leather chairs that probably cost more than my annual salary, and enough legal books to stock a small library. He walked me through the process with the efficiency of someone who'd done this dance before. Anonymous trust, tax optimization, asset protection, investment strategies. Words that used to sound like foreign languages suddenly became my vocabulary. The strangest part was how normal he made it all sound. Like winning $134 million was just another Tuesday for him. I guess when you're dealing with generational wealth on a regular basis, lottery winners are probably small potatoes. That's when I made my first real decision as a rich person. I was going to quit my job. Not immediately, not dramatically, but strategically. The official story would be professional burnout and a need to find myself. Classic millennial nonsense that would make perfect sense to my family. They'd finally have proof that their disappointment of the son had completely lost his way. The resignation letter practically wrote itself. I'd been teaching for 8 years, never took a sabbatical, always put the students first. My principal, Mrs. Henderson, actually seemed concerned when I told her I needed time to reassess my life direction. She offered me a leave of absence instead of a resignation. Good people in education, they always want to help. I declined to leave. Clean breaks are better for clean slates. My last day was a Friday in early June, right as summer vacation was starting anyway. Perfect timing. I cleaned out my desk, said goodbye to colleagues who wished me luck finding whatever I was looking for, and walked out of Lincoln High School for the last time as an employee. Monday morning, instead of planning next semester's curriculum, I was on a private jet to Chicago. Let me tell you something about private jets. They make commercial flying look like riding a Greyhound bus. No security lines, no crying babies, no fighting over armrests. Just you and luxury that costs more per hour than most people make in a month. The Chicago loft was my first real purchase. 47th floor, full city view, the kind of place where the monthly maintenance fees could pay a teacher's salary. I bought it through shell companies Webb had set up, so nobody could trace it back to me. On paper, I was just some mysterious investor with good taste in real estate. The contrast was perfect. Back home, I was Leo, the unemployed teacher living off savings and family disappointment. In Chicago, I was Mr. Fletcher, the client wealthy enough to make investment bankers drop everything for a meeting. I lived in both worlds like Clark Kent, except instead of fighting crime, I was plotting the most elaborate family intervention in history. The wealth management firm Webb recommended occupied 3 floors of a building that looked like it was designed by someone who thought regular skyscrapers weren't impressive enough. Thornfield Asset Management, the kind of place where they probably had a waiting list just to become a client. My first meeting there was surreal. I showed up in my best teacher clothes, khakis, and a button-down that I'd bought at Target 3 years ago. Sitting in their marble-floored lobby, reading the Wall Street Journal like I understood half the terminology, feeling like the world's most obvious fraud. Then the receptionist called my name. Mr. Fletcher, they're ready for you now. Not Leo, not the disappointing younger son. Mr. Fletcher, a man important enough to have people waiting for him instead of the other way around. The tone was respectful, professional, the way people talk to someone whose money they want to manage. The meeting room had a conference table that probably cost more than my car. Senior partners treating me like my opinion mattered. Portfolio managers explaining investment strategies with the patience usually reserved for children or very important clients, which I guess I was now. They walked me through options that sounded like science fiction 6 months ago. Private equity stakes in technology startups. International real estate portfolios. Hedge fund partnerships that required minimum investments larger than most people's net worth. I nodded along, asked intelligent questions, and tried not to think about how I used to clip grocery store coupons. The absurdity really hit me during the drive back to the airport. I was discussing million-dollar investments while my family thought I was too incompetent to manage a checking account. The same week I bought shares in a renewable energy startup, My mother called to ask if I needed help applying for unemployment benefits. Living a double life is exhausting. Keeping track of which version of yourself you're supposed to be in any given moment takes more mental energy than you'd expect. Poor Leo answered his parents' calls with the resigned tone of someone whose life was falling apart. Rich Leo reviewed financial reports and made investment decisions that would have impressed my brother's MBA friends. The phone calls from home became a special kind of torture. My father would launch into lectures about responsibility and real-world employment, while I was literally signing documents to purchase a vintage Porsche 911. My mother would offer to send care packages while I was deciding between Italian leather seats and German engineering upgrades. But the universe has a sense of humor, doesn't it? Just when you think you've got your secret life perfectly balanced, reality decides to test your poker face. That test came in the form of my brother's American dream, falling apart in real time. The gated community where Jake had put his down payment turned into a construction nightmare. The development company, Sunrise Estates LLC, filed for bankruptcy protection 3 months after my brother signed his contracts. Apparently, their financial planning was about as solid as a house of cards in a hurricane. Jake's castle in the suburbs became a half-finished monument to poor due diligence. Missing permits, unpaid contractors, shoddy electrical work that wouldn't pass inspection. The kind of problems that turned dream homes into money pits. Local news even ran a story about buyers getting stuck in limbo while lawyers sorted through the mess. My brother, who had been so confident about his real estate investment, suddenly found himself holding contract for a house that might never get built. The down payment was locked up in legal proceedings. His fiancée started making comments about postponing wedding plans until their housing situation stabilized. I watched this unfold from my Chicago penthouse like some kind of cosmic karma playing out in real time. The same weekend Jake discovered his contractor problems, I was test driving a vintage Aston Martin through the streets of downtown Chicago. The irony was so thick you could spread it on toast. But here's the thing about watching your family's golden boy struggle. It doesn't feel as satisfying as you'd expect. Part of me actually felt bad for Jake. Not enough to reveal my secret, but enough to recognize that schadenfreude has diminishing returns after a while. Then came the phone call that changed everything. I was standing in my new garage, admiring the way afternoon sunlight hit the chrome details on both my cars, when my phone rang. Jake's name on the caller ID. My first instinct was to let it go to voicemail, but curiosity won out. His voice had that forced casual tone people use when they're about to ask for something big. He started with small talk about how I was handling unemployment, whether I was looking for work, if I needed any help getting back on my feet. The setup was so obvious it would have been funny if it wasn't so insulting. Then he got to the point. Temporary financial difficulties. Nothing serious. Just a cash flow problem that any smart investor would understand. He needed $10,000, just a bridge loan, until his situation stabilized. After all, teachers are good at budgeting, right? We know how to stretch a dollar. I'm standing there, surrounded by more wealth than he could imagine, listening to him explain why I should be honored to help bail him out of his mess. The same brother who had never once asked about my financial well-being was suddenly very interested in my ability to contribute to his recovery plan. The best part was his assumption that I had that kind of money just sitting around. $10,000 to someone living on unemployment should have been impossible. But Jake had convinced himself that his little brother was probably hoarding teacher savings like some kind of educational Scrooge McDuck. He kept talking, digging the hole deeper with every word. How this was really an investment opportunity for me. How he'd pay me back with interest once the legal situation resolved. How families should stick together during tough times. The same family loyalty that had been notably absent during 30 years of casual dismissal. I let him finish his pitch while I walked around my garage, running my fingers along the paint job on cars worth more than his annual salary. The Porsche gleamed like liquid metal. The Aston Martin looked like it belonged in a museum. And here was my successful brother, begging the family failure for grocery money. When he finally stopped talking, the silence stretched between us like a loaded spring. He was waiting for me to either agree to help or make excuses about why I couldn't. Those were the only two options in his worldview. The possibility that I might have other plans simply didn't exist in his mental framework. That's when I made my second major decision as a secretly wealthy person. It was time to stop hiding and start playing. Not revealing the truth, not yet, but definitely starting to set the stage for what was coming. The game was about to change, and Jake had just unknowingly made the opening move. I looked down at my hands, saw from months of not grading papers, manicured from weekly appointments at a salon that charged more for nail care than I used to spend on groceries. These weren't teacher hands anymore. These were the hands of someone who had options. My response came out calm and measured, like I was discussing the weather instead of his desperate financial situation. I told him his proposition was interesting, that maybe it was time for all of us to get together and discuss family finances more openly. I suggested dinner, Saturday night, my treat. The confusion in his voice was immediate. This wasn't the script he'd prepared for. He'd expected either yes or no, not an invitation to dinner from his broke little brother. But he agreed, probably figuring that face-to-face pressure would be more effective than phone negotiations. After I hung up, I stood in my garage for a long time, looking at the evidence of my transformation. 6 months ago, I was grading papers and eating leftover pizza. Now I was planning the most expensive family dinner in our history, and my brother had no idea what was coming. The trap was set. The table was about to be turned. And for the first time since winning that lottery, I was genuinely excited about what happened next. Jake thought he was coming to dinner with his unemployed little brother. Instead, he was about to walk into a masterclass on assumptions, expectations, and the danger of underestimating people you think you know. The only question left was whether I was ready to watch their entire worldview crumble in real time. Choosing the restaurant was like selecting the perfect weapon for a very civilized execution. I needed somewhere that would immediately communicate that this wasn't the Applebee's dinner my family was expecting. Somewhere that would make them understand, before a single word was spoken, that the game had fundamentally changed. Elysium occupied the top floor of the Meridian Tower, the kind of place where reservations required a 2-month waiting list and a credit check that could fund a small country. The private dining room cost more for one evening than most people spend on their cars. Perfect. I booked it under my real name, which felt like the first honest thing I'd done in months. Leo Fletcher, party of 5, Saturday evening at 8. The hostess who took my reservation had that particular tone that expensive establishments reserve for people whose money they already respect. The beauty of wealth is how it changes everyone's assumptions about you before you even open your mouth. Suddenly, every service professional treats you like your time matters. Every detail becomes someone else's responsibility to perfect. Every interaction becomes an opportunity for them to exceed expectations they didn't know they should have. Saturday evening arrived with a kind of crisp autumn air that makes Chicago feel like the center of the universe. I showed up early, partly to ensure everything was perfect and partly because I wanted to savor the calm before the storm. The view from our private dining room stretched across the city like a golden carpet of possibilities. The maitre d' walked me through the evening's menu of the reverence usually reserved for religious ceremonies. 7 courses, wine pairings selected by their sommelier, dessert options that sounded more like art installations than food. Each dish cost more than my family typically spent on entire meals. My family arrived exactly on time, which told me everything I needed to know about how seriously they were taking this dinner. Jake had even worn a tie, though it was obvious he'd borrowed it from someone with better taste. My parents looked like they were dressed for a job interview they weren't sure they wanted. The confusion started immediately. This wasn't the family-style restaurant they'd expected. The elevator required a key card. The hostess knew my name without asking. The walk to our private dining room took them past floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased the kind of view you pay premium prices to obtain. Jake kept glancing around like he was trying to solve a puzzle that didn't quite make sense. His fiancée Amanda was doing that thing people do when they're out of their depth but trying to look sophisticated. My parents wore expressions that suggested they were beginning to suspect their unemployed son had lost his mind completely. The private dining room sealed the deal. Crystal chandeliers, hand-carved furniture, place settings that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget when I was actually budgeting for groceries. The kind of space where powerful people make decisions that affect other people's lives. We sat down to what would become the most expensive family dinner in our collective history, and nobody seemed to know how to start the conversation. The elephant in the room wasn't just the obvious question of how I could afford this place. It was a growing realization that maybe they didn't know me as well as they thought they did. The first course arrived with the kind of presentation that belongs in art museums. Tiny portions arranged like abstract paintings, accompanied by wine that cost more per bottle than I used to make in a week. My father examined his plate like he was looking for hidden cameras. As we worked our way through courses that had names I couldn't pronounce 6 months ago, the conversation gradually returned to familiar territory. Complaints about Jake's construction problems. Speculation about legal remedies and insurance claims. The comfortable rhythm of a family that had always treated me like background music to their more important concerns. My mother asked how I was managing financially during my unemployment, the same question she'd been asking for months. I gave her the same vague answers about savings and careful budgeting, which seemed even more ridiculous now that we were eating food that required specialized utensils. Jake's fiancée Amanda started planning out loud how they would spend the money I was going to lend them. Pool installations, kitchen renovations, landscaping projects that would transform their half-finished house into something worthy of magazine covers. She discussed my theoretical $10,000 like it was already sitting in their checking account. The audacity was breathtaking. Here we were, in a restaurant where the bread basket cost more than most people's dinner, and she was treating my potential financial contribution like a foregone conclusion, not asking if I could help, but planning how she would spend my help. Jake picked up the thread with his characteristic blend of entitlement and false gratitude. He outlined his temporary cash flow problems like he was presenting a business case to potential investors. The construction delays, the legal complications, the urgent need for bridge financing until everything sorted itself out. $10,000 would solve everything, at least temporarily. He kept using that word, temporarily, like this was just a small bump in his otherwise inevitable journey toward financial success. Like asking his unemployed little brother for money was just a minor inconvenience that would be forgotten once his real estate empire got back on track. My father chimed in with observations about the economy and the challenges facing young entrepreneurs in today's market. He spoke about Jake's situation with the same authoritative tone he used to explain why my teaching career was a dead end. The wisdom of experience, dispensed freely to those who clearly needed guidance from someone who understood how the real world worked. I sat there eating courses that cost more than their monthly utilities, listening to them discuss my brother's financial problems like they were the most important economic crisis in modern history. The irony was so thick you could serve it as the next course. By the time we reached dessert, I'd heard enough assumptions about my financial capacity, enough planning for money I hadn't agreed to provide, enough casual dismissal of my agency in this decision that was apparently being made for me. The moment had arrived to flip the script entirely. When Jake finally asked the direct question, had I decided about the loan, my answer came out calm and measured. No, I told him I would not be lending him $10,000. The silence that followed was immediate and electric, like the moment before lightning strikes. Then I reached into my jacket pocket, not for a credit card or a wallet, but for my checkbook. The kind of checkbook that comes from private banks that most people don't know exist. I filled out methodically, the sound of expensive pen on premium paper, the only noise in our suddenly quiet corner of the restaurant. The check was for the entire evening's bill. Wine, food, service charges, gratuities that probably exceeded what some people make in a month. I handed it to our server with the casual efficiency of someone for whom money had stopped being a concern quite some time ago. Then came the folder, leather-bound, professional, containing documents that Webb's office had prepared with the precision of a military operation. I placed it on the table between us like I was dealing cards in the world's highest-stakes poker game. The lottery ticket was still inside, now framed like a diploma. The same $3 piece of paper my mother had given me as a consolation prize, transformed into evidence of the biggest financial upset in our family's history. Suddenly, that throwaway birthday gift looked very different in its new context. The trust documents told the whole story. $134 million in the original jackpot, $84 million after taxes and initial investments. More money than any of us had imagined possible. Controlled by the son they'd written off as a failure. I reminded them about the lottery ticket, about my father's words, about their certainty that random chance was my only path to success. Turns out they'd been right. They just hadn't expected their casual cruelty to become such literal prophecy. The silence stretched for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Then my family exploded into activity like someone had fired a starting gun at a race where everyone was running toward the same finish line, my money. My father immediately switched into business mode, the same tone he used when he thought he was being clever about financial matters. This was serious money, he declared, too serious for someone with my limited experience to handle alone. Obviously, he and Jake would need to help me manage it properly. Jake's response was even more revealing. Instead of congratulations or surprise or any normal human emotion you might expect when your brother becomes wealthy, his first instinct was to position himself as my business partner. We could buy properties together, he suggested, invest in his real estate knowledge, build an empire with my money and his expertise. Amanda jumped in with specific plans for how we should spend my windfall. Investment properties, vacation homes, business ventures that would benefit everyone. She'd apparently transformed from planning to spend my $10,000 loan into strategizing how to access my multi-million-dollar fortune. My mother's contribution was the most manipulative. Family loyalty, she reminded everyone. These resources belong to all of us, not just me. We were connected by blood, which apparently gave them some kind of claim to wealth they'd had no part in creating. The same family loyalty that had been notably absent during my 30 years of being treated like an afterthought. Within minutes, they'd revealed everything I needed to know about their character. No congratulations. No genuine happiness for my good fortune. No acknowledgement that maybe they'd misjudged me or treated me poorly. Just immediate, transparent greed disguised as concern for my welfare. I stood up slowly, taking my time to look at each of them individually. These were the people who'd shaped my understanding of my own worth for 3 decades. The ones whose approval I'd spent years trying to earn through achievement they never bothered to recognize. Their reaction told me everything about who they really were underneath the family rhetoric. When faced with my success, their first instinct wasn't pride or celebration. It was calculation. How could they position themselves to benefit from something they'd had no part in creating? I thanked them for their honesty, for showing me exactly what they thought about my competence and my worth, for making it clear that their interest in me was directly proportional to my ability to solve their problems or fund their dreams. Then I told them about Webb, about the proposal he prepared, about the phone call they should expect early next week. This wasn't over. I assured them. In fact, it was just beginning. But now we'd be playing by my rules instead of theirs. I left them in that beautiful private dining room, surrounded by the evidence of wealth they couldn't access and luxury they couldn't control. For the first time in my life, I was the one walking away from a family gathering on my own terms. The elevator ride down felt like descending from one world into another. Above me, my family was probably still sitting around that table, trying to process what had just happened. Below me, the city stretched out in all directions, full of possibilities I'd never imagined before. 1 year later, the office where my family met with Webb was designed to intimidate, which seemed appropriate given the circumstances. Floor-to-ceiling law books, leather chairs that cost more than cars, windows that offered commanding views of downtown Chicago. The kind of space where life-changing decisions get made by people with enough money to enforce them. I appeared by video conference, partly for convenience and partly for psychological effect. Physical distance makes emotional manipulation much more difficult, and I wanted them focused on the substance of my offer rather than trying to work me personally. Webb presented the terms with his characteristic precision. This wasn't revenge, he explained, but what we were calling constructive justice, an opportunity for everyone to get what they claimed to want with certain conditions attached. For Jake, I was offering to solve his construction problems completely. The trust would pay off all debts related to the house, handle legal fees, and ensure the property got finished to original specifications. His castle would become reality exactly as promised. The catch was ownership. The house would belong to my trust, not to Jake. He and his family could live there for life, maintenance-free, but they couldn't sell it or use it as collateral. Every month when he didn't pay rent, he'd remember that his little brother owned the home he'd been so excited to lord over others. For my parents, I was establishing a retirement fund that would guarantee them luxury for their remaining years. Travel, healthcare, entertainment, all the comfort that money could provide. But funding was contingent on their participation in family therapy sessions aimed at addressing toxic patterns and rebuilding healthy relationships. The conditions weren't punishment, Webb explained. They were opportunities for growth. Chances for everyone to examine the assumptions and behaviors that had created our current dynamic. The money would flow as long as everyone was genuinely committed to becoming better versions of themselves. Their reactions were immediate and explosive. How dare I attach strings to my generosity? What kind of son forces his parents into therapy? What gave me the right to make decisions about how they live their lives? Jake was furious about the ownership structure. He'd rather lose the house entirely than accept it as a gift from his little brother. The symbolism was too humiliating, the power dynamic too uncomfortable. He wanted my money, but only on terms that preserve his sense of superiority. My father demanded I reconsider the therapy requirement. Sons don't dictate terms to their parents, he declared. Family relationships don't work that way. The money was mine to give, but not mine to control once given. I listened to their objections through the video link, watching people I'd spent 30 years try and please reveal their true priorities. Not family harmony or mutual respect, but maintaining power structures that kept them comfortable and me subordinate. When they finished venting, I gave them my final response. These were gifts, not obligations. They were free to accept or reject them entirely, but the terms weren't negotiable. I'd spent my entire life living by their rules, trying to earn approval that was always conditional and often withheld. Now I was living by my own rules, started with the most important one, respecting myself enough to demand respect from others. The offer would remain open for 30 days. After that, I'd assumed they weren't interested and moved forward with other plans. I disconnected the call, leaving them to discuss among themselves what they valued more, their pride or their comfort. Either choice would tell me everything I needed to know about their priorities. I never found out which option they chose. Frankly, it stopped mattering once I realized that my happiness didn't depend on their decisions. The most valuable thing I'd bought with my lottery winnings wasn't cars or real estate or investment portfolios. It was freedom. Freedom from seeking approval from people who were never going to give it freely. Freedom from playing roles in other people's stories instead of writing my own. Freedom from measuring my worth by other people's standards. The education foundation I started has become my real legacy. Every year, we provide grants to teachers in underserved communities, funding classroom supplies and professional development that public budgets can't cover. Last month, I visited a school in Detroit where our money helped create a computer lab that's changing kids' futures. I've been traveling, finally visiting the historical sites I used to teach about from textbook photos. Standing in Independence Hall, where the Constitution was debated, walking the battlefields at Gettysburg, where the soul of America was tested. These places feel different when you're free to experience them on your own terms. Sometimes people ask if I miss my family, if I regret how things turned out. The honest answer is complicated. I miss the family I thought I had, the one where love wasn't conditional and acceptance wasn't earned through achievement. But I don't miss the reality of relationships built on disappointment and diminished expectations. My parents thought they gave me a lottery ticket that night at Jake's celebration, a $3 joke about my limitations and their low expectations. They were right about it being a ticket, just wrong about the destination. The $134 million was never the real prize. It was just a down payment on something priceless. The freedom to finally stop seeking their approval. Turns out, self-respect is worth more than any jackpot. That lottery ticket didn't just change my bank account. It changed my understanding of what winning truly means and revealed that the only approval I ever needed was my own.